for Prosperity. I love whenever The Voice over at Ruthless Podcast does the Americans for Prosperity sponsorship there. But they never bring on Akash Chougule, which I get to do. Good morning, Akash. How are you?
Good morning. I've been on there a few times, Hugh. Give him some credit.
I don't want to give Smug and those gang, especially Holmes. I don't want to give him any credit. I like Duncan, and I think Ashbrook is funny, but I don't want to give Holmes any credit at all. And I don't know Smug well enough to taunt him, but I do want to taunt Josh. Look, Akash, we got some ground to cover here. There was a lot of alleged economic talk in the non-interview, the wiffle ball interview. I'm not going to even dignify it by calling it the softball interview that Stephanie Ruhle did with Kamala Harris. First, your overall reaction. Were you among the 1.8 million people, which is remarkably small audience to watch on Wednesday night when Stephanie Ruhle, quote, interviewed Kamala Harris?
Absolutely not. I think the last time I watched MSNBC Live was in 2011 when Scott Walker won his recall election, or 2010, to see their reaction to that. But I did see clips of it, and I think you're right. It was absolutely embarrassing. There were constant non-answers because she can't be honest about her record on the economy because, as we've discussed, it's terrible.
All right, I want to walk through three of her responses to get your response as the Vice President of Americans for Prosperity. And if you want to help Americans for Prosperity in the battleground states, head over to americansforprosperity.org/volunteer. americansforprosperity.org/volunteer. Here is cut number 13 on price controls and price gouging.
Prices are still high.
Yeah, I agree with you.
You said you want to take this on by going after those who engage in price gouging.
Yeah.
But as somebody who supports free markets, who's a capitalist, how do you go after price gouging without implementing price controls? Because once we get in this zone, people start to get worried and they say, I don't know what she stands for.
So just to be very frank, I am never going to apologize for going after companies and corporations that take advantage of the desperation of the American people. And as Attorney General, I saw this happen. In the midst of an emergency, whether it be an extreme weather event or even the pandemic, we saw it, where those few companies, not the majority, not most, but those few companies that would take advantage of the desperation of people and jack up prices. Yeah, I'm going to go after them. Yes, I'm going to go after them. And that is part of a much more comprehensive plan on what we can do to bring down the cost of living, including housing, including the everyday needs of the American people.
Akash, that's idiocy. That's absolute nonsense. There is not a significant part of the market that price gouges. It is not the explanation for prices. What do you make of that? You're the economist guy.
It's not only generally insane, Hugh, as we've discussed this, price gouging and price controls and doing this kind of thing that Harris is talking about, it is not theoretical. It has failed every single time it has ever been tried in every country over the history of mankind. It fails today in industry after industry where the government tries to do this. And in particular, the places where she's talking about trying to do this. So, for example, with grocery stores, retail, food chains and things like that, is a particularly insane place for her to talk about this. I'll give you an example, Hugh. Food prices at grocery stores actually fell almost 4% in the month of August. But you never hear them say that greedflation is over or that businesses are all of a sudden not being greedy or they're not price gouging when prices fall or when the growth of prices slows down. You never hear them renege when things go in the direction they want them to. It's only ever, businesses are evil and they're the ones to blame, when in fact, as we've discussed, it's the $6 trillion in additional spending that Democrats pushed through when they were in full control that actually drove this inflation crisis.
It's simpleton stuff, and anyone with even high school econ, much less college economics, much less serious economies, would agree. Yeah, that's just a fable. It's a myth. It's a legend intended to be believed by people who don't know anything. Cut number 3 now is where she makes a vow. Cut number 3.
Expanding that child tax credit, or you mentioned housing before, giving that extra money for a first home. If you can't raise corporate taxes, or if GOP takes control of the Senate, where do you get the money to do that? Do you still go forward with those plans and borrow?
Well, but we're going to have to raise corporate taxes, and we're going to have to make sure that the biggest corporations and billionaires pay their fair share. That's just it. It's about paying their fair share. I am not mad at anyone for achieving success, but everyone should pay their fair share. And it is not right that the teachers and the firefighters that I meet every day across our country are paying a higher tax than the richest people in our country.
This is not just nonsense on stilts. It's nonsense on Starlink takeoff, Akash. I just can't believe, as a constitutional law professor, well, we're going to have to raise corporate taxes. Guess what? They're not going to raise corporate taxes when the Republicans take the Senate, which was the predicate in Stephanie Rule's question. So it's completely non-responsive. But what did you think of that bit of inanity?
Oh, I love this, Hugh. This is such an important point. Such an important point. There's two things here worth pointing out. Three. So one, as you mentioned, of course, they're not going to raise corporate taxes if Republicans control one chamber of Congress. The other is that corporate taxes don't pay for the kind of promises that Vice President Harris is talking about. Corporate tax revenue makes up a minuscule part of the federal budget. You would have to raise the corporate tax several times over, multiples of what it is, to try to pay for these enormous hundreds of billions, trillions of dollars in promises that she's making. The corporate tax is not a significant source of revenue. It never will be. And so it's incorrect to say that it can pay for the promises. And then when it comes to the rich, quote unquote, paying their fair share on the individual side, one, the rich overwhelmingly pay the vast majority of individual income taxes already. We have an extremely progressive individual income tax code. And so she would only make that even worse. There's no point at which the left will ever say the rich have already paid their fair share. And then one additional point, you know who pays their taxes through the individual code and will be slapped with a massive tax hike if she were to actually do that? Are small businesses. Pass-through businesses pay on the individual income tax side. Many of those are small businesses. She wants to raise taxes on employers who are the ones helping put food on the table for the working class families that she claims to care about, all to pay for her massive bureaucratic spending plans and to hire more government union bureaucrats.
One last question, Akash. She keeps talking about the federal government's going to build 3 million houses. You and I know, but I want your comment on this. The federal government doesn't build any houses at anything like a competitive rate with the market. From 1989 to 2016, I represented landowners getting their permits from the federal, state, and local government to build houses. The federal government makes it worse, not better. Do you think she has a clue about what she is asserting she can do about cutting red tape?
Absolutely not. I think she's directionally correct. And I think she knows that when it comes to housing costs and how that really is a pain point for the American people. It's a pain point for young people. I think she frankly deserves some credit for having the awareness to know that that's a politically sensitive issue. But in general, there's very little the federal government can do on this issue. States are largely, and cities are largely where that problem will be solved. One need only look at the comparison between San Francisco and Houston and housing costs there for two very large cities to see the difference that local governments can make instead of the federal government. But again, she's dodging, and her plans would only make matters worse when, in fact, it is her track record, her administration that has made prices go up in the first place. The price of labor, the price of lumber, the price of materials, the price of things that go into your homes. And all she wants to do is dump more federal tax dollars to the problem, which is only going to make the problem worse by raising prices again, over and over again, as we've seen in industries like healthcare, higher education, and others, where the government throws money at a problem without doing anything to fix it.
I think she's economically illiterate, but I don't know that that is particularly surprising because she did not make any persuasive case on any issue. Akash Chougule from Americans for Prosperity, thank you for joining us today. Head over to americansforprosperity.org/volunteer if you want to get involved on the ground in one of the swing states or from your home using the variety of tools that americansforprosperity.org/volunteer will make available to you. I want to say one thing about immigration reform.